I like being confused with country singers. That's a good thing in Nashville. It's a great joy to be with you this morning, and Susan and I are thrilled to be at Belmont University and in Nashville and part of the great state of Tennessee. I was actually born in Nashville, though we moved from here when I was 6 months old, so I haven't had a long experience of Nashville. We're thrilled now to be residents of this community and this great state. It's a great joy to be with you this morning. Well, as several people have already noted, we've been through a really rough 2 years with what I call multiple pandemics. It's not only COVID-19, it's the heightened focus on racial injustice, the economic disruptions, the political polarization, now the challenges of the situation and the horrifying events in Ukraine, and especially also the challenges of mental health. And yet, in the midst of those multiple pandemics of the last 2 years, we can't lose sight of the fact that most of what has happened for us in the last 2 years didn't get created in these 2 years. They've simply been intensified and made worse. A lot of these issues have pre-existed, and now they're becoming more problematic, and we need to grapple with them in deeper ways. Particularly as we think about the situation as it affects children and families and youth. I want to focus on two phrases. The first is haunting memories. That's what leads to the focus on ACEs and the situation of needing to be trauma-informed in our work. Those haunting memories that happen especially for young children as well as for others. And I think about people now in the midst of seeing the atrocities in the Ukraine and it evoking all sorts of other haunting memories. In Toni Morrison's powerful novel, Beloved, the narrator is describing Sethi. And the narrator says, "It was never too early to start the day's work of beating back the past. For too many people, especially those who've had adverse childhood experiences, there is a sense in which those memories haunt on a daily basis. They afflict us and continue all through adulthood. And that haunting has a character to it that feels like it hovers. It takes on a reality and a kind of persona that isn't just in our minds. It shapes so much of what we do, and it haunts and it afflicts in such powerful ways. Those haunting memories are part of what we have to deal with, what people like Judge Filial have to deal with in juvenile court. It's not just that there is a separate way to identify episodes that happen. It's part of a longer trajectory of how those memories haunt us into the present. Not only what we do or have had people do to us or fail to do for us, it's also those memories that exist in the broader social environment. I remember one time when I was in Israel and the guide said to us, he said, "That's where we won the decisive battle." I said, "What was that?" I was thinking 1973 or 1967. He says, "With the Maccabees." 2,000 years ago, those memories were still alive as if they had happened yesterday. Those memories often exist in haunting ways, and they afflict us and they present significant challenges for us. The second phrase, in addition to haunting memories, is lost connections. Lost Connections. That's the title of a book by Johann Hari that came out about 4 years ago. British journalist. The presenting issue for him was actually the fact that he'd been on antidepressants for many years since he was 12 years old, and they hadn't really worked. And so he starts investigating what's going on with the pharmaceuticals saying that they're going to be able to solve issues of depression. And he wasn't able to find that. But then he begins to realize that there are deeper issues that he was struggling with that the antidepressants simply masked or dealt with the symptoms and not the deeper issues of what he calls lost connections. And then he lists the varieties of ways in which there are lost connections. Lost connections to meaningful work, meaningful relationships, meaningful values, the natural world. Lost connections to early childhood trauma. And lost connections to a hope for the future. Other than that, things are seeming to go fine. But he was talking about those lost connections prior to these multiple pandemics that have shone such a light onto our challenges and issues. Those lost connections He also has a TED Talk where he says, the title of the TED Talk is, "Everything We Know About Addiction is Wrong." And part of what his point is that addiction is actually a misplaced attempt at bonding. Whatever the form of addiction it is, it's trying to fill the gap of those lost connections by bonding with other things that make matters worse rather than better. And what we tend to do in our culture is shame people for their addiction, which further isolates them, rather than providing a healthier set of connections. The combination of those haunting memories and those lost connections converge to create multiple problems that we focus on treating symptoms rather than dealing with the underlying issues. Susan and I are passionate about early childhood education and formation because so many of the issues we deal with as adults and as young adults and even as teenagers actually have their origins in early childhood. This is not me saying anything new to you, except it's important for us to focus on the underlying challenges that we face and to find ways to help people get started better so that we can avoid having to just deal with the symptoms later in life rather than helping people flourish from the get-go, from the first days of their life. I remember in my own work and in my own life, and as Susan and I were working on some of these issues, just realizing the statistics about the number of words that under-resourced kids get between 0 and 5 and how the inequities in education by the time kindergarten starts, and yet everybody talks about K-12, hardly anybody talks about pre-K. And when we do, and in Nashville, I've been in so many meetings in the United Way Board and other kinds of settings where we talk about the problem of child care, but we use the words child care as if it's just a place to store kids during the day so that parents can get on to their work. We need to be talking about early childhood development and education and formation, about helping kids get started well so that by the time they start kindergarten, they have a really bright future ahead of them. We need to be thinking about these in different ways and frames to really be able to address that. We all talk about the issues of third grade reading levels and all those kinds of dynamics. And yet, if we aren't also paying attention to haunting memories and ACEs, if we're not paying attention to lost connections and the ways in which that just continues to intensify and worsen the challenges that we face, then we're going to be dealing with symptoms rather than the root causes. Those haunting memories and lost connections existed prior to the multiple pandemics. And my concern is that if we just focus on the last 2 years and then say, "Whew, glad we're through with that," then we may not get to these deeper issues. I'm grateful for the work you all do every day in trying to address these deeper issues, and yet I think there's something important for us to find new ways to work together to address these deeper questions, particularly for children 0 to 8. Long before I came to Belmont, Belmont was fortunate to get one of the Building Stronger Brains grants as people were coming together to work in new ways. It was under the extraordinary leadership of Dean Kathy Taylor and our Inman College of Health Sciences and Nursing to work on dealing with trauma-informed education. One of the things we discovered was that Belmont didn't have any courses dealing with that. Through this grant, we were able to develop 25 courses that are dealing with it, training hundreds of students, working with other organizations and providing resources to other colleges and universities. Now we have hundreds of people who are learning about how to do that better, how to help support and encourage people to come together to find new pathways to deal with ACEs, to provide ways to address those haunting memories, to help provide new ways to cultivate connections. Some of the work we're also doing is Brad Paisley and Kimberly Williams. Paisley started the store on Belmont's campus for food insecure people. No surprise, food insecure people also tend to have other challenges. And so coming alongside them with music therapy to deal with ACEs and other dynamics, we're now working on job training for those people, because no issue that we deal with exists within a single discipline, within a single area. They intersect, and we have to find new ways to collaborate if we're going to be able to achieve the kinds of flourishing that we want for our children, our grandchildren, for each other, for all of us. It means we have to find new ways to come together. I'm delighted to learn of the ways in which you all have been doing that over the last several years, and I want to encourage that going forward. It's about the work that happens out in the field that you do day in and day out. It's also working to train leaders and to raise up people who have the lenses to see that these issues intersect, and that we have to get to the deeper causes and the deeper questions if we're going to make the ultimate progress that we want to make. Seeing that progress that we were able to do through the Building Stronger Brains grant that Belmont received just drives a greater sense of acceleration. If we can achieve as much as we have been able to achieve through that process in the midst of COVID, imagine what can be possible when we focus our attention on really transforming kids' lives, helping address the deeper questions, helping cultivate stronger families, enabling people to dream and have an imagination for the future. That's what's really crucial, and Tennessee is a great state to be able to be doing this together, to be working across the state with partners in varieties of sectors to enable all of this work to happen and to come to fruition. When I became president, I've been doing work on social innovation for a long time. I could tell you a much longer story about my discovery of the need to work at the intersections if we really want to affect change. But when I got to Belmont, I thought, wow, this is an environment that already cares about these intersections. Belmont was the first university in the country to start a major in social entrepreneurship back in 2007. And I thought, what a great opportunity. And so we launched a new initiative. We call it BASIC, the Belmont Accelerator for Social Innovation Collaboration. The idea was to get faculty working across colleges, across disciplines, and across areas with staff and students and with community partners. And the focus that we decided for the initial launch was on children 0 to 8 and their families. It was partly informed by Susan's and my passion. Most of the credit goes to Susan. She's the one who's taught me most of what I know about these issues. And then that data around how important it is for children when they start kindergarten already to be in good shape, to have that kind of literacy. In North Carolina, when we were at Duke, we worked with congregations across the state, particularly in rural areas, because they had fellowship halls and they had places to gather. And they discovered that when mentoring happened with young children, especially during the summer, and the summer slide would happen, amazing things could happen. The state actually discovered that some grants that the Duke Endowment of Private Philanthropy in Charlotte developed for rural congregations, they actually achieved much greater outcomes than did the state programs. And I think part of what happened was that the volunteers in those congregationally based programs were also investing in the kids outside of the formal mentoring time. They were saying, hey, let's go for ice cream this afternoon. They were spending time with them. They became invested in them. They also provided good, nutritious food for them in addition to the tutoring program and the mentoring program. And those children 0 to 8 were seeing, not just stemming the summer slide, they were actually seeing significant improvement. That's what can happen when we work together and we find new resources, whether it's in the inner cities or in the rural areas. Tennessee's a state that mirrors North Carolina in many ways, where you have some cities flourishing and you have a lot of areas of the state not doing so well. We have the resources, we have the opportunities. So the BASIC program was designed to develop experiments where we could do the proof of concept that some of these things might undertake. We quite quickly discovered that there were faculty that already had relationships, one in Edge Hill, the neighborhood right across the street from Belmont, one in Antioch dealing with refugee and immigrant communities. And so we undertook these two projects right away to begin to develop those experiments, because if we begin to see the relationships that need to be formed as intrinsic partnerships rather than transactional relationships, so often we think of what we're trying to do as transactional. And when we think of them as intrinsic partnerships, everything changes, because now my flourishing is dependent on yours as individuals as well as organizations, and we become mutually invested in seeing things change. And those kinds of intrinsic partnerships mean that it does take, as Judge Filyaw and Richard were talking about, it takes a long-term commitment. And so our basic initiative isn't designed just for 6 months or a year or two. It's designed to come alongside communities, to work together, to hear the perspectives and the challenges, and then figure out how we can make significant progress. Well, in order to do that, I want to conclude by lifting up 2 phrases, one of which we've been using at Belmont as part of my inaugural year, but didn't really quite realize how much hold it would take. It's the phrase, "let hope abound." And that phrase was really born out of discussions last year during the transition. We were trying to figure out something that would signify Susan's and my leadership at Belmont during our first year. And I just happened to say, it's not an easy time to be optimistic because there's so many challenges that we're dealing with and so many difficulties. And yet it is a time when we can still be hopeful. Hope is a virtue that embraces both the challenges we face and a sense that we can make progress. It's different than optimism or just kind of positive thinking or Thomas the Tank Engine, I think I can. Hope embraces a realistic assessment of the brokenness and challenges, the haunting memories, the lost connections, and yet with an inspired focus on what we can achieve together. And that notion of letting hope abound has this kind of onomatopoeia effect of it sounds like what you say. So as soon as you say let hope abound, it kind of gives you some energy. It's also not a zero-sum game. If you let hope abound, it has a multiplier effect. Just a side note, when you think about multiplier effects, every organization has those people who are multipliers. You want to be around them because they help you think better thoughts and dream better dreams and relate better, and you just want to be around them because they have that kind of multiplier effect. Liz Wiseman has some really interesting research in a book called Multipliers. She contrasts them with diminishers, those who you don't want to be around. Then when you're around them, you have to schedule an hour or 2 to try to recover from it. Let's all commit to being those multipliers in our organizations, in our communities. That's what letting hope abound involves, is facing the challenges that exist, looking at them with clear eyes, and then focusing on what we can do together and how we can achieve extraordinary things. So we need to let hope abound. And the second phrase is to be radical champions for the flourishing of children, youth, and families. That phrase, radical champions, comes from a conversation I had with our new director of our Belmont Data Collaborative, Charlie Apigian. We recruited him to Belmont from MTSU, and when he was coming to Belmont, I said, "You've been involved in the Nashville tech community for a long time. What have you learned about collaboration, their needs, their interests, their wants?" He says, "Well, what I've learned about Nashville is that there's a lot of interest in collaboration, passively. People are glad to meet, they're glad to come together, they're glad to talk, and everybody nods their heads, and then everybody goes back to their work." He said, "What I've discovered is if you want something to change, it takes a radical champion. Someone who just says, this is so clearly our ought, we're gonna do it, we're gonna lead, and we're just gonna keep working at it because it is so clearly our ought." I said to him, "Can an institution or an organization be a radical champion?" He said, "I don't know why not." And so lo and behold, we've now built it into our vision statement at Belmont that we want to be radical champions for the flourishing of all. That is, we need to have that kind of proactive commitment to the future that says, whatever else, we want to keep working at these issues. We want to work on the flourishing of all, especially those young children who are just getting started, to find ways to deal with ACEs, to do the kind of trauma-informed work that can provide healing for the haunting memories, that can provide connections where they've been lost, and provide that kind of renewal that enables our communities in urban and rural counties across the landscape of Tennessee. Why not have us be the place that becomes the exemplar of how to nurture healthy children, families, and youth, now and going forward? I'll just conclude with this image. It came when my wife was a pastor in Baltimore. She was talking with a woman who had extraordinary leadership and had had a tremendous impact on lots of kids. And one day, Susan was talking to her and she said, "How is it that you have this impact? What is it about? What's your plan? What's your strategy? What's your tactics? What's your magic was basically what she was asking. And she said, I give the children 3 things. Someone to love, something meaningful to do, and something to believe in. 3 things. Sounds simple, and yet in the midst of haunting memories and lost connections, extraordinarily challenging, as you all know far better than I. And yet, if we can be radical champions for helping our young people from the ages of 0 all the way through adulthood, if we can help them find someone to love, something meaningful to do, and something to believe in, perhaps we will all be in a new and deeper way radical champions for the flourishing of children and youth and all of us. May it be so. Thanks very much.